I already have my project loaded and I am now recording for you guys. And we have the list of all the things we're going to do today. So here we go. All right, I'm going to do it without the VR headset today, just have more room here to muscle around. The first things we're going to take a look at is the first person and the third person templates, okay, and how to put those into VR. So one thing you might notice if you've used one template and imported another template, that sometimes the buttons don't work, and we should talk about that first because we're going to have to navigate that right now. So I started this off with a VR template, right, and the VR template has buttons for using the controllers, right? But if I was to load in a first-person template, the WASD wouldn't actually work, and that's because it's not just doing key presses in the blueprints; it's doing bindings, and I'll show you what that means. So it's a way of saying spacebar does the same thing that the A button does, the same thing that all these different redundancy checks. And what it is these templates are trying to make it really easy to use, so you can use a PlayStation controller, an Xbox controller, a keyboard and mouse, and all this kind of stuff. But it also makes it so that when they break, you don't know how to fix them because they're not directly in the blueprints. So this input tab has these actual bindings. And for instance, teleporting is like using the thumbstick, right? But if I look down here, it's actually looking at a face button and a thumbstick, right? These are these event triggers. These are key presses inside of the game engine, right? So this is a VR configuration file. And if you were to start with a first-person template and then load in the VR template, these bindings wouldn't be there. It'd be the bindings that are for the first person. So I'm going to export this. And it's just like a little INI, which is like a FIG file, and I'm going to put it on my desktop. And usually, like when I'm working between a lot of different projects, I'll keep a VR input backup and like a first-person VR backup inside of my desktop. And then the same way I export it, you can import the one you need, and it'll update right here. So that's a little bit of a technical thing, but I know it would stump everyone if we didn't go through the whole process of how to fix that. So here, as again, this is a VR template. But if I add a feature like the first-person controller, which is already selected, if I add it to the project, and then go to the map, and they might have fixed this since I've tried it last, but I do believe that if I hit play, great, it works. Let's see. Let's see if it changed the... No, but it works. We'll take it. We'll take it. So let's just move on, and then we'll see if it works for the third person. Otherwise, we won't deal with the complexity of trying to figure out configuration files. So if you're using a first person, right, WASD and jump, right? There's a tab you probably don't have available on your Unreal Engine, but by default it's not up. It's called World Settings. If I go to World Settings, and if it says none, it's going to default to whatever that the pawn is in your level. But if I ever want to override this, if I just go game mode is game mode, oh, this one's in there. Let me get rid of this real quick. It lets me fly around. So if you ever just don't want to have the first person thing and you don't want to be tied to jumping and whatever, just change the game mode to game mode. All right, I'm going to put the thing back in. But with this pawn set as player 0, it's going to default as being the default pawn. All the way to the bottom, all the way to the bottom. Go scroll wheel. Right, so if I take this off, what is it? I'm floating around. Right, because it's only because it's set as player 0. Boink. It actually stopped the camera. Boink. Boink. Anyway, so, and changing it back to first person. So these game modes are a way of choosing pawns, which are game modes are just blueprints that say which pawn you're using. Right? I turn it off. I'm free to be whatever I want to. And then if I want to be first person, I just go in and say auto possess player, and I am player 0. Right? Let's get rid of the gun. So when you first open up the player, again, this is I loaded this in. It might be a little bit different from yours, and if you're on a Mac or a PC, it might look a little bit differently. But essentially, this gun and these arms exist as assets. So if I just get rid of them, they're gone. And now I'm going to have a couple of references to the blueprints. They're going to have errors, so I'll just compile, get those errors, and if these are hyperlinks, just go to them. Or they should be hyperlinks. There you go. So like in the construction script, it wants to attach the gun to the body. Get rid of that. And then this one is this one right here. The whole bottom stuff is how to spawn projectiles. We don't care about projectiles because we're not shooting anymore. All it's going to just go away. If I compile, there's no errors. And now I'm a first person because I could jump, but I don't have a gun anymore. Right? Now, what can a first person do? Well, I can hit the documentation button. I don't even know what that was. So apparently there's a button on my keyboard that goes to the documentation page. That's cool. I'm brutal, these keyboards. But what we want to do is we were talking about maybe we could change the speed at which it travels. So there's a thing called a character movement that's part of every single different blueprint. And as I said, like actor blueprints are generic and you can do anything with them, but nothing is exposed. This character movement thing, look at that right side of my screen. Look at all the things I can do. These are all these parameters that are built in that I now have access to override and drive at real time, right? Everything here, if I say jump z velocity, I could probably, access it. Right, and you could set these things. So what does that mean? Well, by default, where I can make it jump higher, right? So, or maybe we want it to jump lower. I don't know. Let's say for right now that it jumps 3 times as high. Right. So if we're doing a car game or whatever, we probably don't want it to be that much at all. And look, we have things like braking deceleration when falling, air control, how much you can actually turn and pivot in the air. And then the most important thing before I move on is just the max acceleration and then the step height. Step height means I can walk on things as long as they're lower than 45 degrees. If I make it 90 degrees, that means I can walk up walls. Right? It wouldn't stop. It would just turn up and walk on walls. So you can play around with a lot of these things to create interesting settings. Max walk speed is 600. So if I wanted to be faster, I could do twice as fast. And then you can always say like add slippage so that you could slip around corners. And these are just things to play around with. Okay. Cool. To taste. All right, so let's now do the third person. There we go. And we'll open up the third person map. So if I look at my world settings, there's no game mode override. So that means that this pawn is set as player 0. Go to detail panel to confirm that. Whoop. And yes, it's player 0. That means if I disable it, I can fly around and there's the dude waiting. Right? Boink. But if I want to be him, player 0, and let's go inside this blueprint. In my viewport, you see I have a camera boom. This is that little like fishing line that holds it behind you, and it has a arm length. Again, something that can be done in real time. A student one time did a really great experience where you were a third person looking over somebody's shoulder, and then when you got to certain vantage points, it would animate in and become a first person point of view at these like vantage points, like these scenic overlooks, and then it would then transition back when it was walking around. So these can be driven in real time, but if we bring it down to 0, let's do it as a slider. Right? right? Make it 0. And then probably move it up. There we go. And maybe even, there we go. It's like a little bonnet. Now I can look down and I have a body. Right? Maybe not as much control as I wanted, but it's an idea, right? It's something. When he runs, he leans forward. So maybe we would want to parent this to, like, right now it's just parented to the center. We can maybe even parent it to the head. If it's attached to a mesh, I could choose which bone it's parented to. Be the head, and let's get rid of these offsets. Oh, he's way out there. I don't know, something to play around with. Ultimately, I think you're going to find it being not the most ideal way of doing it because it's going to be shaky or rocky, but it's something to definitely explore. I wouldn't have mouse override in VR. I think it would face forward, but it is kind of a cool idea to do that, right? So that's all I had for third person and first person. But again, all the same character movement overrides with jumping and movement and all that kind of stuff. Cool. Now let's move on to. No, we're going to save that. We're going to save that. Let's do sequencer because we didn't get to that yesterday, or last week. So I've uploaded just a basic mesh into Mixamo, and I'm gonna look for a pack and hit search. And there are sometimes like packs of animations, like a male injured pack. Yeah, it sounds pretty weird to me too. This website seems to be a little funky. Why are you not dancing? Let's give her open a lid. What's up? Let's refresh. Okay. Sorry, the website needed to be reloaded. Looking for packs. Here's like a locomotion pack. So it's a list of animations. But let's do it one at a time because what we want to do is make these in place. Mixamo keeps on changing the website, so it used to be a list of them on the right side. It's a farming pack, carrying heavy things. Nice. Let's just get walking. That's a great walk. And see, there's a button called End Place. There's two different ideas of how you would do animation. There's you let it offset itself, right, like this. So this is moving in absolute positioning. And then there's a way of, if you click on In Place, it does it on 0, 0. And that's how you do video games, how they offset it using parameters, right? Just our third-person character is just running in place, and it's using a movement speed to move forward. So I'm going to download one. And then I'm going to download one in place as well. And we can experiment with which one we want. Cool. And we can do running. So again, running the absolute positioning. And then running in place.
So which one is absolute again?
Absolute is the running when it's not in place, where it's exactly where you recorded the mocap in the room. In place means it's just parented to the pivot point like this, right? and we would use a parameter. We're going to try both. Both have their advantage and disadvantage. Again, if you're doing a lot of motion, I would oh yeah, let's do that. That's not terrifying. All right, so first there, and then in place. And then I think we probably need to get one turn. There we go, right turn. And this one's kind of in place, it's kind of not. Mirror would just mean it turns the other direction, which is the other option there. And then by default, I'm going to get a T-pose. So I can make sure that the character is uploaded right for the first time. And mirroring a T-pose is just a T-pose, so I don't know why that button's there. Let's find T-pose first. And we'll call this one base mesh. And then let's go over to Unreal and skeletal meshes, do a new folder, base mesh. Oops, can't do spaces. And then let's import first the T-pose one, which I renamed base mesh. And what this does is it ensures that my character is named base mesh instead of T-pose or whatever. Just that makes sense for me. And then it's also going to bring in a T-pose animation. Cool. Everything looks good. Looks fine. There's the T-pose animation. Let's bring in everything else. All right. Open. And it's already chosen it for me. I don't want to import the mesh. I want them all to be in the same mesh because I'm going to be blending animations that are all in the same mesh. I don't want to have to switch out characters every time I do a blend, right? And we just remember that when they append the one, that means it's in place. Cool. Just chucking a bunch of keyframes, just trying to like reduce stuff. Cool, so now if I go back into my animations, they're all listed here next to it, so I can preview them with absolute positioning and in place. Cool. Terrifying. Terrifying. Walking. Walking. Alright, let's throw it in. We'll just do it here. I don't need a crazy world. I can just show you guys right here. So, let's just fly around and let's do a sequencer. And this is going to be called animations. Cool. And let's throw in our character. And the character is a space here for using an animation blueprint, which we might not get to for a while, but we're going to use the animation asset, and we could choose one of the many assets that are imported, right? In the same way, I could have also just brought in an animation, which a lot of people did for their homework last week. But if I go to sequencer and take base mesh and throw it in, you see I have an option to add animations. So we can start off walking. And then bring in an animation for running. But what we see is that it doesn't reset, right? It goes back to where the character was imported. And what's even more fun, if I take this and I bring it and squish them together, it creates a crossfade. You guys see that little and you have like curves here. You can like adjust how much it like linear or whatever. But what this is going to do is it's going to not only crossfade all the bones, but also the position. Right? Which could be an interesting effect. But this is why we don't use absolute positioning for a lot of game engine stuff when you're blending in between, because they have the root goes back. Now, I do believe that I could say, like, let's see, there might be a setting to overcome that. I think I read that they added a new feature that lets you not do that. Maybe keep state. Let me just see real quick, and then I'll move on. I just want to. Otherwise, I'll. If I figure it out, I'll let you guys know. Is locked. Keep state. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is how I would do it, which is bringing in the in place ones. So you have walking, in place, and these are loops, right? If I drag it out, it's just going to loop it again. And just keep on walking in place, and then I can bring in the running in place. Again, it's a loop. So you see how it blends. And then we would animate it, the transform, or use code or whatever to move it. It's probably going to be easier to keep a consistent velocity. So, edit, properties, finished. Alright. I want to get rid of that crossfade, so I'll just add it again. And so we're going to walk. Walk. And then we'll crawl. And it loops. And then under transform we have position, and we'll keyframe it, and we'll just need to see how far we think it needs to go. Another keyframe. Right? One thing I noticed that it is actually it was on curve, so it kind of like sped up and slowed down. And remember, we can adjust that here and just keep it linear. Linear. There we go. Right, we can maybe make that happen a little longer. There we go. That's pretty cool that it can like just blend like those bones, and just there might be some problems with that, like, you know, hands passing through a face or something like that. So you have to be kind of smart, and that's why it's oftentimes good to get like neutral poses, things that are kind of like what you call an A pose, where the arms are kind of off the body, and that way you can add that in. If it's like over here and you want to get down here, you don't want it to go like this. You want it to go like that. You add in a little bit of this in between, and it'll interpolate through that. So you just gotta be kind of smart, and you can play around with it as much as you want to. In general, like if your characters don't move at all. It might be easier just to have a lot of things where they're standing in place and they're just blending between whatever. Later on, animation blueprints are blueprints that are just dealing with animation data types, and I can show you guys how to like use the upper body from one animation and the lower body from another animation. And this is like how you would have a running animation, and like a character would like take a gun and do whatever. The legs are still doing the running animation, and then it's blending in a different animation for the arms and that kind of stuff. So its stuff is super powerful, and it's really, really interesting how it works. Cool. So what's some other things that we'd want to be able to do in our character animation? Well, one thing I really like to do is footsteps. So I am going to go to freesound.org and get some free sounds. All right. Footsteps on concrete. I can preview it here. It's pretty quiet. That's fine. I don't care. I don't have to sign in. And then let's download it. I have the Creative Cloud, so I use Adobe Audition. You can use Audacity if you want something for free. And but I've been using this program since it was called Cool Edit Pro 1995.
No way.
Then Adobe bought it in like 2003 or whatever. So it's just an audio editor that's pretty simplified. In fact, they've taken away a lot of the functionality. But I know a lot of you guys are talking about sound, so I normally don't do sound until the second half of the semester, but let's go ahead and just dive into it for the rest of this class. So I have here a stereo audio file. Okay, so in Game Engine, especially in VR, audio can be localized. It has a specific source, right? It has an attenuation, it has a fall off. So if I walk away from it or go towards it, it gets louder or quieter, right? So I almost always, if I want to do music or a voiceover that's like in my head, I can leave it stereo. But I generally just do everything as mono because there's overrides to making it feel like it's stereo no matter what. So a good rule of practice is to do a couple of things, and they're all kind of in this little favorite section. So I'm not even going to do any parameters. I'm just going to do some presets. Right? First of all, it's a little quiet, and I want to make sure that all my sounds are perfectly mixed level when I bring them in. I can change the volume based off other things. So let's go ahead and normalize it to -1 decibels. I'm bringing it up to the 0, right? So now like there's a little clipping right here, but this is much louder. What's wrong with my current hardware settings? Sorry, I haven't used Audition on this computer maybe. But this gives us a chance to debug this. Audio hardware. Yeah. No input. Sure. Oh, I could do the Crestron. Okay, I get it. Okay. Cool. There you go. That's cool. So I just need individual steps. Okay. So I'm going to kind of zoom in here and just take like 4. I don't really care. That's perfect. Take this and copy to new. Go back. That sounds great. Take this one. Copy to new. And 2 more. What I'm doing is I'm showing you like as complicated as sound can get, but obviously this could just be a song or a voiceover that you make for yourself and it just plays. And 1 more. That one's just fantastic. How could I miss that one? All right, so I'm going to save these as wave forms. I'm going to make them 44.1 sample rate. That's fine. I'm going to make a mono, and I don't need 32-bit sound. Sounds can be much lower resolution unless you're doing music, so I'm just going to do 16-bit. And I'm going to say save to my project. And do foot 1. And it should save my settings now. Sounds, and just to change the setting to mono and 16. Okay. And I called it untitled, but I don't really care. Mono. Before I separated them out, I should have changed them all to mono first, but what are you going to do? Mono, 16-bit, cool. And that's all I need this for. I'm going to go over to Content Browser and get my audio files and bring them in. Cool. And you can see they're mono and their individual little steps. Okay. Now, sounds also have their own kind of blueprints, and they're very much. They're called cues. They're very simple, and they have two things we're going to use today. We're going to take foot 1, right-click on it, and say create a cue, and we'll call this foot cue. And inside of it is a little speaker, right? And I'm going to take the other ones and drag them in here too. So we've got 3 wave files, and what I want to do is do 2 things. I want to randomly choose which one. So this gives a little bit more organicness. People don't see the patterns of the fact that I'm only using 4. And then I want to I do believe it's modulate. Let's see. Yes. So modulate means that I can make the pitch a little higher or a little lower, a little louder, a little softer by a couple of bits. I'm going to use 0.9 and 1.1. So it's choosing a random sound, and each time it's modulating it slightly so that it sounds different than the time before. Save. So, you know, we're now we have a little bit more organicness. Maybe they could be more similar. So right now there's like one that really sounds like a thud, so I could definitely hear it coming back out, but you get the idea of this. So let's come over to our animation. And on the walking in place, you see there is a timeline here. If I drag it to when it takes the first step, I can right click and say add in a sound. And this sound is going to be my foot cue. Cool. And then next step, right there, right click, sound. And again, this could just be a voiceover that plays at the very beginning.
Or like a voiceover file.
Yeah, a voiceover file could just start at the very beginning, or if you just throw a file into the world, it becomes an automatically playing video audio file. It's when you want to trigger them that you have to make sure they're not auto-activated, and we can get to that in just 1 second. One more step, boom. I'm not being really precise, but you guys get the idea. Play a sound. And as you see, it says play a particle effect next to it. You can make it like dust come up every time you... Alright, we'll probably have to do that too. Foot cue. And what do I have? One more? It's the very beginning. Right. We'll start with one. Play sound, and this one's foot cue. Foot cue. I probably could have copied and pasted these. Yeah, copy and paste. Oh well. So now when I hit play, cool. But one thing I noticed is that it's not attenuating, and I'll show you that real quick as well. So let's get our free sounds and find a bird call. Flamingo calls. Sign me up. Download. Why are you asking questions? Alright. Let's come back to Faithful Audition real quick. And let's throw it in. Cool. A little dead air at the end we don't need. A little dead air at the beginning we don't need. And then I can normalize to whatever. It was pretty much normalized. And there's some other things like we can go ahead and make it mono here. And that's better. You got a little reverb, add a little compression, whatever you want. And let's export it the right file format to my project. Sounds. Maybe call it something like Flamingo. And then again, mono 16-bit. Cool. Let's bring it in. There it is. And if I throw it in the world, you see down here, it says auto activate. So if I hit play, it's just playing. Right? That's fine. If I didn't want it to play, I turn off auto activate. And then I could trigger it with a trigger box or on a, whatever. I can also load it into sequencer and make it a soundtrack. So, nothing, right? Let's go to our sequencer. So my sequencer's right here. I want to put it at the top so I can find it easier. So I'm going to call it 00 sequencer. I kind of make little numbered things, so now it's always at the top, and I can find it really easily. And we're going to autoplay. Right? Cool. That's good. Let's go in here and throw in our sound. Alright, so now we can activate it in sequencer if we wanted to. Activate. Are you not activating? Let's not do it that way. So we know we can auto activate it, but what I want to show you guys, and hopefully this room is stereo panning, is that it's not attenuated yet, meaning it doesn't have a localized position. no matter how I look, it's just in my ears. Much easier to hear when you're in VR. Because what I need to do is come to this file and say override attenuation. And then you see that it has a fall off. See that? So it's at 100% at this inner circle, and it's at 0% at this outer circle. Right now it's in a linear fall off. I'm going to make it really small and bring this in. Cool. So now, if I play, it's over there. It's over here. Cool. So spatialized sound in VR is super compelling. It's great for your environments of really local. Remember, we can put this stuff on a sequencer, which is what I was going to do in a second, which is Flamingo. And now that it's auto playing, I can actually animate it so that it's like these birds are flying over my head, right? They start over here, and then if I add a transform, for location, I can make them animate over my head. For added fun, we can even add in Doppler. You guys know what Doppler is? So it's like the compression and rarefaction of audio files. Basically, it's going to go, meow. You know, it's like when a car goes by you real quick. It's super fake. But it could be fun. So apparently this room is wired incorrectly. It goes left to right, right to left. Anyway, good to note. Or maybe from my perspective it's right. I don't know. Anyway. So one last thing is these footsteps are not attenuated. Okay? So luckily there's an attenuation node in here that has all those settings. Alright, we say override, and then how big the thing was, right? So it's super small. And then I put it in. Cool. And if you keep on using attenuation, I use basically, if I come up with a room, I have everything kind of have the same attenuation. I just adjust the volume a little bit. If you keep on using the same attenuation, it could be easier to just create a attenuation file. Right? This is called third person map attenuation. And then same settings, right? Override. Oh, they've added so much cool stuff. Look, they've occlusion, so when things are behind walls, they actually do a low pass filter. That's super cool. That's brand new. Enable spatialization. There it is. So this is the attenuation now. I can make this 100 to 1,000. So now that I know my settings, and if I look at all these audio files, I can also make the looping. I can load in this attenuation right here and say put it in here. Use that file I just made, and that auto loads it for each one. Also, in the walking, let's make sure it follows. Follow it. Follow it. Cool. That way, it's following the bone. The bones. And then the last thing I want to do was on here. I wanted to here we go. Drag. Kind of on top of it. Over here I can add in a particle effect. And the particle effect can be explosion. And I'm going to attach it to the right foot. cool. And I'm going to drag it over here. So now, right? It gave me a second track, so that makes it easier to see. Add, oh, I can copy and paste. Copy, paste. No. Copy, paste. Not foot cue, I want particle. Copy. There we go. And where is it? It's going to be on the left foot. So now, copy, paste, copy, paste. Yeah? Okay. So we just jumped into sound because some people were mentioning wanting to have sound in these experiences for the midterms, and it's so great for environment. It's localized. You can figure out how you're going to direct people's attention by animating sounds, by having sounds. Just remember that sounds that are directly behind you, you really can't tell where they're at. Think about the different zones that where the ears can hear. Try to keep sounds out here, and if it's right here, then I could turn to it. But if it's behind me, I don't know which way it is. All right, so start messing around with sounds. That could be super powerful. In fact, it's really night and day when you start getting audio in there. And just remember that you could trigger voiceover, ambient music, and special effects, right? And then they can all be triggered as interactions as well. That's it for today. Yeah.
Do audio music mix in Unreal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is using the default audio engine. There's actually specialized engines for audio that are part of the plugins. Like you can load them in. Like Oculus has its own audio plugin that's even more specialized for VR. And then if you want to go further into audio, there's things called Fmod, which is a plugin for game engines that's much more advanced. A lot of people use Wise with two W's. I don't know if it's called Wise or if it's just called Wise. I don't know. And then Google makes one called Resonate. But that might also be their plugin for 360 video. But there's a bunch, and there's some just look at Fmod, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's the sound is really, really boring. It's good enough for me to do simple things, but if you really want to get into mastering, you're going to use some of these plugins. And there's a lot of really good tutorials on procedural audio in Unreal. That's procedural level generation, but there's audio stuff, and there's a whole hour-long talk where they give about doing procedural audio and whatever. So anyway, without further ado,